The sky turns orange before the sun rises. A barefoot man tears through the streets, screaming for his neighbors to run. Behind him, buildings erupt into flames. Gunshots echo. Mothers clutch their children and flee through choking smoke. Just hours earlier, this was Black Wall Street, one of the richest black communities in America. By morning, it would be almost completely erased. How does an entire city vanish in less than 24 hours? A young girl watches from an alley, too frightened to move, clutching a doll to her chest as a group of armed men march past just feet away. An old man kneels in front of his burning porch, not to fight the flames, but simply to remember, for one last moment, exactly how it looked before. By the time the sun is fully up, this will not be a neighborhood anymore. It will be ash. 12 hours earlier, this was one of the wealthiest black communities in the entire United States. Doctors lived here, lawyers lived here, hotel owners, newspaper editors, school teachers, and shop owners who had built something almost nobody thought was possible in early 20th century America, a self-sufficient black economy, thriving in the middle of a country that did everything in its power to make sure it never could. By the next morning, almost none of it will remain. How does a thriving town, home to thousands of families, get wiped off the map in less than a single day? Who set it on fire, and why? And how did the story of what happened here get buried for almost a century, hidden from textbooks, hidden from classrooms, hidden from the descendants of the very people who lived through it? Stay until the end, because the final 10 minutes of this story will show you exactly how a nation forgets and how it slowly, painfully starts to remember. Before we go further, if stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe now. This channel exists to tell the histories that got left out of the textbooks, and there are dozens more waiting for you. To understand how something like this happens in 24 hours, you have to understand what took decades to build. At the turn of the 20th century, black Americans across the South were living under the crushing weight of Jim Crow. Segregation wasn't just a set of rules, it was an entire system designed to keep black families poor, uneducated, and dependent. Banks wouldn't lend to them. White-owned businesses wouldn't hire them for anything beyond the most menial labor. Neighborhoods were carved up to keep black and white residents apart, and the law made sure it stayed that way. So black communities did something extraordinary. They built their own. In a district that would come to be nicknamed Black Wall Street, a community of black entrepreneurs, professionals, and working families created something almost unheard of anywhere else in the country. A self-contained economy where a dollar earned by a black resident could circulate through black-owned businesses again and again before it ever left the neighborhood. There were grocery stores and barber shops. There were law offices and doctors' practices. There was a hospital built and staffed because black patients were routinely turned away or given inferior care elsewhere. There were movie theaters with velvet seats, restaurants that stayed packed on Saturday nights, and a public library that welcomed black children who weren't allowed to set foot in the ones downtown. 2 newspapers ran out of the district, printing news for and about the community that mainstream papers ignored or twisted. Churches, some of the largest and most beautiful buildings in the entire district, served as the spiritual and social backbone of daily life. Families who had migrated from poverty in the Deep South, some of them the children of enslaved people, now owned their own homes, sent their kids to well-kept schools, and walked down paved streets lined with brick buildings that they themselves owned. It wasn't handed to them. Nothing about it was handed to them. It was built brick by brick, dollar by dollar, in spite of a system engineered to make sure it never happened. Picture a Friday evening on the main strip. Streetlights flicker on above brick storefronts. A shoe shine stand does brisk business outside a barber shop where laughter spills out onto the sidewalk. A group of school children, freshly let out from an evening music lesson, weave between grocers closing up for the night. A man in a pressed suit tips his hat to a woman stepping out of a hat shop with a new purchase wrapped in paper. Down the block, A jazz combo warms up inside a supper club, the smell of fried catfish and cornbread drifting into the street. This wasn't a fantasy. This was an ordinary Friday. Families who had arrived with almost nothing, sharecroppers, children, the sons and daughters of formerly enslaved people, migrants fleeing violence and poverty in the rural South, were now homeowners. They held deeds with their own names on them. They sat on porches they had paid for themselves. In a country where black land ownership was still treated as a provocation in many places, this community had turned ownership into a way of life, and it passed that lesson to its children like an inheritance. And it worked. By the early 1920s, this district was one of the most prosperous black communities in the entire United States, some said in the entire world. That prosperity did not go unnoticed. To white residents in the surrounding city, the wealth accumulating just blocks away was almost impossible to reconcile with the racial hierarchy they had been raised to believe in. The idea that black families could out-earn, outbuild, and out-prosper many of their white neighbors challenged the very foundation of Jim Crow society, a system that depended on the belief that black Americans were meant to remain beneath white Americans economically and socially. Resentment simmered under the surface. Rumors spread about black residents becoming too proud, too successful, too armed. Local newspapers occasionally ran stories stoking fear about crime, framing black success as a threat rather than an achievement. Some white residents openly admitted they didn't like driving past blocks of black-owned brick buildings that in some cases looked nicer than their own. Children growing up in the district could feel it too, even if they didn't have the words for it yet. A boy walking downtown with his father might be told to keep his eyes forward, to say, "Yes, sir," even to men half his father's age, to understand, without ever being told outright, that the moment he crossed an invisible line between his neighborhood and the rest of the city, the rules of the world changed completely. Prosperity had not erased Jim Crow. It had simply built a fortress against it, brick by brick, and everyone inside knew the walls were not as thick as they needed to be. Membership in white supremacist organizations was climbing across the region. Local police departments, in many cases, were either sympathetic to or directly overlapping with these groups. Guns were easy to come by, fear was easy to spread, and in a city already simmering with racial tension, it would only take one incident, one spark, to set off something catastrophic. Nobody in the district could have known it, but the countdown to the worst 24 hours of their lives had already begun. If you're finding this story as unbelievable as we did researching it, drop a comment below and let us know what part is hitting you the hardest so far, because it only gets more intense from here. The spark, when it came, was almost unbearably small compared to what it unleashed. A young black man was riding an elevator operated by a young white woman in a downtown office building. What exactly happened inside that elevator has never been fully agreed upon. Some accounts say he stepped on her foot as he entered and she screamed in surprise. Others suggest an accidental stumble. What's certain is that no credible evidence ever emerged of any assault, and the young woman herself reportedly did not want to press charges. But by the time the story reached the local newspaper, it had transformed into something else entirely, a sensationalized account alleging attempted assault, printed in bold type on the front page, reaching thousands of homes within hours. The young man was arrested and taken into custody at the courthouse. Word of his arrest spread through the white parts of the city like wildfire, fueled by the inflammatory newspaper coverage. By early evening, a mob had begun to gather outside the courthouse, calling for him to be handed over, language that, in that era, in that region, could only mean one outcome: a lynching. Word of the mob reached the Black District within the hour. Men who had served in the First World War, trained and armed, made a decision that would change the course of the night. A group of them, some accounts say dozens, other estimates run higher, traveled to the courthouse, offering to help protect the prisoner from the growing crowd. It was an act of extraordinary courage, armed black veterans standing between a white mob and a courthouse in the heart of Jim Crow America. For a tense stretch of minutes, the sheriff managed to keep the peace, urging the black veterans to return home, assuring them the prisoner was safe. Then, somewhere in the chaos, a gun went off. Accounts differ on who fired first. What's certain is that once that first shot cracked through the night air, there was no controlling what came next. Panic spread through the crowd. More shots followed. In the confusion, the group of black veterans retreated back toward their neighborhood, and the white mob, now larger, now armed, now enraged, followed. Inside the district, word of the standoff spread house to house. Men strapped on whatever weapons they owned and headed toward the courthouse, some leaving wives and children behind with only a hurried, "Lock the door behind me," as a goodbye. Nobody in those homes could have known it would be the last ordinary conversation they'd have before everything changed. Mothers sat awake by windows, listening for gunfire, praying it would stay far away. It didn't. By midnight, what had started as a disputed elevator encounter had become something the city could no longer contain. Word spread through white neighborhoods with terrifying speed. Men were deputized on the spot. Some of them handed weapons directly from the National Guard armory and local hardware stores, which had thrown open their doors to arm the growing mob. Cars packed with rifles rolled toward the edge of the Black District. By 1 in the morning, the first shots were being fired into homes along the border streets. The 24 hours of destruction had begun. What happened over the following hours would later be described by survivors not as a riot, but as an invasion. Armed groups moved block by block, systematically setting fire to homes and businesses. Survivors described seeing airplanes overhead, some reportedly dropping incendiary devices onto rooftops. Others used to track residents fleeing on foot. Families woke to pounding on their doors, ordered out at gunpoint, sometimes with only seconds to grab a child or a photograph before being marched away from homes that would be burning within minutes. "Get up! Get out! Now!" The kind of words repeated in doorway after doorway, in home after home, as the mob worked its way deeper into the district. Business owners who had spent decades building their storefronts watched from a distance as their life's work was looted first, then set ablaze. The hospital, the one built because black patients had nowhere else to turn, burned to the ground, along with the hotel, the movie theaters, both newspaper offices, and virtually every church in the district. Firefighters who arrived on the scene were, in several documented cases, turned away or ordered at gunpoint not to interfere. Some families fled north, sheltering in nearby fields and wooded areas until the shooting stopped. Others tried to hide in basements or attics, terrified that any movement would draw gunfire. Elderly residents who couldn't run were left with agonizing choices. Children were separated from parents in the chaos and confusion, some not reunited for hours, others not for days. One mother, still in her nightgown, would later describe grabbing only a family Bible and her youngest child before running out the back door as the front room filled with smoke. A teenage boy hid beneath the floorboards of a church for nearly 6 hours, listening to footsteps pass overhead, unsure whether the next sound he heard would be rescue or discovery. An elderly shop owner stood on the sidewalk in front of the store he had spent 17 years building, watching it burn, refusing to move even as neighbors begged him to run until they physically pulled him away. "Just keep walking, don't look back, don't stop." Those were the words passed from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor, again and again through that long, smoke-filled night, a single instruction repeated so often it became almost a prayer. By dawn, the fires had merged into a single wall of smoke visible for miles, and the sound of the neighborhood, the music, the laughter, the church bells had been replaced entirely by sirens, gunfire, and silence. Thousands of residents who survived the night were rounded up and marched to holding sites around the city fairgrounds, ballparks, other public spaces hastily converted into internment areas. Armed guards stood watch as families who had done nothing wrong were held for days, unable to return to what was left of their homes, unable to even confirm whether missing relatives were alive. Inside those holding sites, survivors searched face after face in the crowd, calling out names, hoping to hear a familiar voice call back. Some found their loved ones within hours. Others spent days not knowing, staring at every new group of detainees brought through the gates, bracing themselves each time for news that never came, or news they were terrified to hear. To be released, many residents were required to carry identification cards signed by a white employer or sponsor, a final, humiliating condition attached to re-entering the ashes of their own neighborhood. By the time the sun rose the next morning, more than 35 square blocks lay in smoking ruins. Over 1,000 homes were gone. Hundreds of businesses no longer existed. The community that had taken decades of relentless work to build had been destroyed in less time than it takes most people to complete a full workday. The exact death toll remains disputed to this day. Official records at the time listed a number far lower than most historians now believe to be accurate. Some estimates from later investigations suggest the true toll may have run into the hundreds, with many victims buried in unmarked graves that researchers are still working to locate more than a century later. No one in the district that night had done anything to deserve what came for them, and by morning, almost everything they had built was gone. If this story is affecting you the way it's affecting us, this is exactly the moment to hit that like button. It helps push stories like this to more people who need to hear them. In the days that followed, the city offered no meaningful accountability, despite thousands of white residents having actively participated in the destruction, looting homes, setting fires, shooting unarmed civilians. Almost no one was ever prosecuted. Some grand jury proceedings were convened in the aftermath, but they largely placed blame on the black community itself, framing residents' attempt to protect one of their own from a lynch mob as the root cause of the violence, rather than the mob that burned an entire district to the ground. Insurance companies, many of which had specific clauses excluding coverage for riot damage, denied nearly every claim filed by residents seeking compensation for their destroyed homes and businesses. Attempts to sue the city for damages failed in court. The families who had lost everything were left to rebuild almost entirely on their own, with little to no outside support, in a city that had just demonstrated exactly how little their lives and property were valued. And yet, remarkably, many did rebuild. Through that first brutal winter, families lived in tents provided by relief organizations, some spending months in makeshift shelters before new homes could be constructed. City officials, rather than helping, floated proposals to rezone the burned district for industrial use, effectively trying to prevent survivors from rebuilding on the very land their families had owned. Residents fought back through the courts and, against enormous odds, won the right to reclaim their own land. Brick by brick, plank by plank, survivors began reconstructing what had been taken from them, often with their own hands, using whatever salvaged materials they could find among the ruins. Some families pooled what little money they had left to rebuild a single home at a time, moving from house to house as each new roof went up. Within a few years, portions of the district had been rebuilt smaller, poorer, and forever changed, but not erased. The psychological toll, however, never fully healed. Survivors carried the trauma for the rest of their lives, many refusing to speak about what they had witnessed, even to their own children. An entire generation grew up in the shadow of the destruction, raised by parents and grandparents who had watched their world burn and had been taught in the aftermath that speaking too loudly about it could be dangerous all over again. For decades, the story was buried. It wasn't taught in Oklahoma schools. It wasn't included in most American history textbooks. Local newspapers largely stopped referencing it altogether, and city records related to the event mysteriously went missing for years. An entire catastrophe, one of the deadliest acts of racial violence in American history, had been allowed to simply disappear from public memory. Not because it wasn't significant, but because remembering it was inconvenient for the people who had allowed it to happen. It would take nearly 80 years before the silence began to break. In the 1990s and early 2000s, historians, journalists, and descendants of survivors began pushing for a formal investigation. A state commission was eventually established to research what had actually happened, interviewing elderly survivors before their memories and their lives were lost forever. The commission's findings, released decades after the destruction, confirmed what survivors had been saying all along. This had not been a riot caused by the Black community, but a coordinated, large-scale act of racial violence, aided in some cases by local law enforcement and government officials. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted years later, began identifying what researchers believed to be mass grave sites unmarked, unacknowledged for generations, holding the remains of victims whose deaths had never been properly recorded. Excavation efforts continue to this day, slowly working to identify remains and, where possible, return names to people who were denied even that basic dignity for 100 years. Memorials have since been built, museums have opened, dedicated to preserving the history and honoring the survivors and their descendants. Formal apologies have been issued by city and state officials, decades too late for most of the people who lived through it, but not too late for the descendants still fighting to have this history fully recognized, and in many cases, still fighting for reparations that have yet to materialize. The story that was nearly erased is finally being told, but it took almost a century of silence to get here. So why does any of this still matter more than 100 years later? Because this wasn't an isolated incident. Similar acts of racial violence and economic destruction happened in other Black communities across the country during this same era, stories that, in many cases, remain even less known than this one. Understanding what happened here isn't just about honoring the past. It's about recognizing a pattern of erasure that allowed these events to be buried for generations and making sure it never happens again to any community for any reason. It matters because the wealth that was destroyed in those 24 hours didn't just disappear for one generation, it disappeared for every generation that came after. Homes that could have been passed down, businesses that could have grown into family legacies, savings that could have funded college educations for grandchildren who were never born into that inheritance because it was burned to the ground before they existed. Historians and economists continue to study just how far-reaching those losses were, rippling forward through decades of Black families who were denied the generational wealth their community had worked so hard to build. Consider what that means in practical terms. A family that loses a home doesn't just lose a building, it loses the equity that home would have accumulated over a century, the collateral that could have funded a small business loan, the inheritance that could have covered a grandchild's tuition. Multiply that single loss by thousands of families across dozens of city blocks, and the true cost of those 24 hours becomes almost impossible to calculate. It is a debt that, in the eyes of many descendants and historians, has still never been fully repaid. Every generation since has had to answer the same question in its own way. Do you rebuild in the shadow of what was taken, or do you let the silence win? For 100 years, survivors and their descendants chose again and again to rebuild, not because it was easy, but because forgetting was never really an option they were willing to accept. And it matters because remembering is an act of resistance against forgetting. For nearly a century, the people who wanted this story buried very nearly succeeded. It survived because survivors refused to let it die, completely passing it down in whispers, in family stories, in the quiet insistence that what happened to them mattered, even when the rest of the country wasn't ready to listen. Today, that community stands as both a memorial and a warning, a reminder of what was possible when a group of people were given even a narrow sliver of opportunity, and a reminder of how quickly that opportunity can be violently taken away by those who saw it as a threat rather than an achievement. Walk through that district today and you'll find new buildings standing alongside preserved fragments of the old cornerstones, foundations, a handful of structures that somehow survived the flames and still stand as witnesses. Descendants of survivors give tours past the site of the old hospital, the old newspaper office, the churches whose bells once called an entire community to worship. Some of those descendants have spent their entire adult lives fighting for recognition, for reparations, for the simple acknowledgement that what was taken from their families deserves to be counted, named, and repaid. That fight is still not finished. The buildings are gone. Many of the names of the dead may never be fully recovered, but the story survived. A town can be burned in a day, but its story doesn't have to disappear. As long as it's remembered, history still has a voice. If this documentary moved you, that's exactly why this channel exists, to bring these forgotten stories back into the light. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Every like, every comment, every share helps make sure history like this never gets buried again. Thank you for watching.